Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of workplace design, as we always do. I'm Brett Howtop, founding partner of Workshape, and I'm really excited to be speaking with Dr. Jenna Mikus, one of our new friends, who is managing partner of a company called Eudae Group. Jenna's research on eudaemonic design, which is, if you haven't heard, we're going to get into it in a minute, but if you haven't heard of it, it's creating environments where people can truly be their best selves. That is really compelling to us because it aligns perfectly with what we're about, which is trying to help organizations figure out how to create meaningful workplace experiences or get more out of the time they spend together at work. Jenna, thanks a lot for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Brett. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into some of the fun stuff, talk a little bit about your background, help people understand what you're about. And maybe to do that, let's get into fundamentals. Your eudaimonia, as I understand it, it focuses on Aristotle's concept of human flourishing. Can you explain what eudaimonic design means and why it's actually relevant, even more relevant today, maybe than it's ever been?
Of course. Yes. I mean, I know it is quite a mouthful with eudaimonia, but it's one of those intentional conscious choices that we've made to keep the true meaning of the word in its entirety. And I came upon it at a very influential time in my life. I was at this crossroads, if you will, thinking about starting my own firm. I had been doing consulting for almost 2 decades at that point, and I really wanted to shift with a more intentional purpose. And I came across the term eudaimonia when I was in London and just really thought that it ticked a lot of the boxes I was going for. It could be interpreted as realizing one's best self, as you said. The breakdown of eudaimonia is really you, which is good, and daimon, which is self or spirit. So realizing that good, true self spirit, activating that, and doing that in a way that really aligns with human flourishing. And a lot of times there's this misconstrued understanding that eudaimonia is happiness. It's not happiness. We don't want to make it just that superficial interpretation of well-being. It's more about comprehensive health, physical, mental, social. It's about that flourishing side of wellness. And with that comes true well-being, eudaimonic well-being, which is a very studied aspect of positive psychology, and sometimes happiness, because when you design for eudaimonia, the belief is that you also experience hedonia, which is more of the like pleasure side of life. So eudaimonia is oftentimes thought of
Okay.
as meaning, whereas hedonia is more about pleasure. But if you design for
Okay.
hedonia, you pretty much only possibly get that. Whereas with eudaimonia, my thought was that you could get both hedonia and eudaimonia. And that's been something that's been studied for the test of time. It's just never really been designed for. And that's what I wanted to do. So I could get into all the different facets of eudaimonia, but that's really just how it started as a design vision goal process, but really a paradigmatic ideal, this vision that things could be better and not just lean on tech as a panacea or any one approach to solution making.
Well, there's a lot, so much there that I could ask about. The part that I'm particularly interested in is this idea of being fulfilled and flourishing doesn't necessarily, it's not just happiness. And I think most of what we think about currently in Western culture is like people ask you things like, did you enjoy your day? Do you enjoy your job? Are you content? Or are you happy with your career choice? And I was sitting here thinking, as you were saying that, I was picturing moments when I'm most excited about what I do and I feel most connected to what I do. And for me, that's the moments when I have butterflies and I'm really, really deeply thinking about what I'm doing to the extent that I almost can't think of anything else. And I can do that for hours. And if you were to ask me in doing that, am I happy right now? I might say I'm in my happy place because I love this feeling, but it's the feeling I don't, it's not a happiness thing. I'm not laughing. I'm not even smiling probably. I am intensely focused on something and I have this sense of overwhelming excitement and positive energy about what's happening. And I want more of it. And I want to figure out how to keep it going. And when it stops, it's like a letdown, that I don't have that feeling anymore. To me, that's much more how often can I achieve that is what I'm after. How does that align with what is the thinking about around eudaimonia?
Oh, it aligns beautifully. I mean, it sounds like you're describing not only aspects of contentedness, which sometimes is interpreted as happiness, but I like the sustainable happiness, contentness sort of approach. So if you're content in what you're doing, you don't have any drudgery really that you're just dealing with on a day-to-day basis. You're doing things that you like. It might not always be easy, but that's really where we get meaning, is having that sweet spot of challenge but also capability and competence. So what we want to do in workplaces is support that vision and enable people to realize that and work in a way that built on their strengths and doesn't necessarily only shine lovely bright lights on weaknesses that some places do. The other aspect is it sounds like you're talking a lot about flow and that idea of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow. It's just so fundamental to positive psychology and positive psychology, which is now interpreted more as well-being science. I think more because of the toxic positivity conversation that has been happening over the past few years. People have moved a little bit away from positive psychology in the international community, but the foundation of a lot of that was all started with that idea of flow. So, again, being one's best self, how can we curate conditions for that? Oftentimes interpreted more from a psychological perspective. But I thought it'd be really interesting to figure out how we can actually curate spaces to realize flow. And with that, eudaimonia and all the other aspects of that. So most people probably know, but flow is that idea of you get in the zone and all of a sudden it's 4 hours later. And it happens a lot to musicians. It's been studying a little bit more quantitatively and rigorously over the past year or two. I think about a year ago, Yale and a few different universities made some really interesting discoveries about what was required. And with that came the realization, that balance of the need for challenge and competence, doing things within your wheelhouse and doing that in a way that and in a space that allowed for that and supported that vision. So that's been something I've been getting more into as I continue to test out the resonance of eudaimonia as a term. It's also being used as flourishing by design. I have a community that I run that's called FXD, or flourishing by design, because people just understand flourishing a little bit better, which makes sense. But it is all built on eudaemonic design framework and the work that I did with my research. But my most recent work is now getting more into flow and working very intentionally at the apex of well-being science and architectural science, and figuring out all the lovely alignments that lead to that across typologies, because of course the needs that would be needed for a musician in perhaps a performance hall might be different than what I need even in a practice room, let alone a very different type of worker, for instance, healthcare or a teacher. So I've been
Right.
interrogating the unconventional workplaces lately too, in addition to commercial offices, which has been really fun.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to get into that in detail because I think it really applies a lot of things we're thinking about as well. But before I do, here's my biggest question about all of this, because when I talk to people about what I do and say I love what I do, and I'm passionate about what I do, and I find joy in what I do. I have a number of people who I know my whole life who will say things to me. Yeah, well, most people aren't as lucky as you. Most of us just do a job and we just go to work because we have to, and we're still searching for that thing that brings us passion and joy. And I look at then people who even are in jobs they say they enjoy, or a career that they wanted to be in and they enjoy the career, and so much of their day of work is stuff that they haven't had any control over. It's things that probably don't bring them, but definitely are not getting them in a flow state and are more task oriented. So, what I would love before we talk about the spaces that can support flow, I'd love to talk about what has to change about the work that people do. Because take a mid-level data analyst job, somebody that, and maybe somebody who loves numbers has a chance to just stare at numbers and they get in the flow, and they had an afternoon where no one bothered them and it was an amazing thing. But I could think of a lot of jobs that are very people dependent meeting, I'm managing a bunch of people. I have one conversation after another. My whole job as a middle manager is to meet with everybody on my team and talk to them. And so I wonder, do you feel like there's a potential state of flow for everybody, regardless of what their job is? And that potential, because I agree. I mean, that's what I was, without using the word, that's what I was describing of what, when the more often that happens, the more content I feel with myself and with what I'm doing. And those weeks where I have very little of it, I can feel it. Like I know that I haven't had it and I don't, and your energy levels go down, your excitement about what you're doing reduces, your attention to detail can go down because you're not at that heightened place of you're really dialed in. And I want what you're saying to happen as many places as it can, as often as it can. But I'm getting a lot of pushback from people when I talk about this who are saying, yeah, well, what I do is just a job. There's no way I can ever experience that. And I don't have any control over it. What would you say to people who say that?
I mean, there's certainly this idea of privilege that is oftentimes, I think, put with the label of being one's best self. And, I think there are different ways you can interpret that. You can, of course, see it as that and perhaps not necessarily get worried that everybody's going to feel that way and have that need. But I think deep down, everybody wants to have some aspect of meaning. And perhaps meaning for them is just putting food on the table, and doing that day to day work and not having somebody get in their way while they do it. Maybe that
Right.
also means helping them in different aspects of their lives. So maybe not having the most flourishing, supportive workplace per se from a physical perspective, but maybe it's giving them the organizational support so that they could have flexible hours, or maybe they offer something like childcare, and that could be enough to change someone's life so that they don't have to worry about their main responsibility in life. So I think that there are ways that we can experience different aspects of flourishing that may not be construed as true flow, where somebody really does get lost in the work for hours on end and just feels everything is just satisfied in life for them.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of balancing all those different pieces out. But we can also come back to the science of the positive psychology basis of eudaemonic design, which is self determination theory. And that's something that I have had to get smart on the past few years and knew nothing about prior to
Right.
2019. But that's looking at DC and Ryan. They're the primary authors of this self determination theory, or SDT as I call it. And it relies on three different tenets. We have competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And by designing for those, it's believed that we might be able to attain eudaimonia, or eudaimonic well being. And if we can satisfy that, then great. So, therefore, maybe we could get closer to flourishing. So, what I would say would be, maybe we don't go after flourishing per se, but maybe we can go after those foundational truths and satisfy those in ways that actually works for someone. So, again, that competence, allowing somebody to do their jobs, with autonomy, allowing them to do it with choice and on their own terms. And then with relatedness and enabling them to perhaps socialize whenever they wish, doing individual work, teamwork, etc., when and as needed. And I mean, simply by satisfying those, we might be able to get to that final, lovely, almost flourishing future. I think that's really important.
Right. Awesome. Well, there's the, in what you're saying, there's the aspect of management of not really the management of people, but the creation of a work ecosystem that allows those things to happen, that give some amount of autonomy to people, that give some amount of framework and structure to it so that that can happen. I think what happens a lot is, well, I have this intention, I have this day planned, and this is what's going to happen. And then everyone else's intentions are not aligned with mine, and we're all fighting one another, which that noise and dissonance seems to be a big part of the problem, where people aren't able to achieve what they could achieve were it not for, and it's ironic because they need those people's help. They need to collaborate with them, but they all get in each other's way and they wish that they weren't there. They wish that
Yeah.
they weren't involved because I could just get so much more done, which is where it comes to this. It's much easier when I'm not there at the office because I can manage the distractions way more than when I'm there. So to that point, what are your thoughts on how to, and I've seen a couple other folks in the recent past, some illustrations of what a eudaimonic space that allows you to get to a state of flow could be. And it feels like it's always the two that I've seen were very much layering of like
Yeah.
a making steps to get to a place that you can't just decide right now, I'm going to get to this place. I'm here and doing one thing, and 10 seconds later I'm doing that thing. But it's a process that builds you up, and that a lot of us don't even realize we're doing when we do it, but we have gotten there, and we've probably used the same methods to get there and just not realized or quantified it. But I'm curious, so there's the process to get there, and then the space that supports it. And is there anything that exists right now in a typical office space that does give you a path to that? Or do you feel like this is a totally new type of space or series of spaces that is yet to be created?
I think it's a mixture. So I'm aware of some of the references. I mean, think eudaemonic design, when I kind of created the term years ago, I hadn't come across things like David Duane's eudaimonia machine until later. So it sounds like that might be one that you're referencing. And I've spoken with David and he's brilliant, but there is definitely a layered aspect to it. And I oftentimes think of his machine breakdown of a plan very similarly to my college library. I went to Johns Hopkins and there were these depths of layers, and you would be on M level for the mezzanine if you want to socialize. And then you'd go down to A if you want to be kind of in between, and all the way down to D if it's deep level study. And to me, I think that makes perfect sense when you're looking at an elevation or a plan. But I think when it comes to a living and breathing office, it needs to have a little bit more nuance. And it needs to not just be about demarcation of space. It needs to have a layered strategy. And I think this is where I kind of put my strategy cap on from the past and
Sure.
think that it's not just going to have a physical aspect, it's going to have other pieces. And this is where I think providing that support to people in different ways is really key and can be realized. So through things like physical and building environments, of course, that would certainly be something that I emphasize and think is really important. But I think also technology can play a role. So we can have digital interfaces to enable us to be connected at home, do work on our terms, and of course, be very competent on a day-to-day basis. And we can also have organizational support. If you think about the organizational environment and what HR supports and provides, that of course is its own layer of protection. So I think those facets need to be interrogated. And that's why a lot of the things that I do is from a human building interaction domain, which is a formal course of study in computer human interaction or human computer interaction, the CHI and the HCI communities. And that was only a formalized term in early 2019 by Olivier et al. When I first started my PhD. And I had been doing that smart, sustainable strategy work in intelligent buildings for a decade at that point. But people weren't always talking about the subtlety of buildings, technology, and people and all the complex interactions that are in between. And to me, getting into eudaemonic design and my approach to that, it involves all those different pieces. It's about the building, it's about how it's laid out, but it's also about the different sensory aspect of that, mixing those arts and sciences and having the well-being science and the architectural science. And with the well-being science, another really important piece is activating people from within. I really believe in complex strategies and a way to actually achieve sustainable success, not complex as in overwhelming, but complex as in mitigation plans. You have a plan A, but we all know plan A rarely works out. So how can we embed other aspects of backup plans into a plan A to provide some of that support? And I try to do that in a variety of ways with physical design. And then, like I said, those other facets. So when I think about how I can achieve eudaimonia in a workplace in particular, yeah, it's not just about layering or how deep you can get. It's about providing the support along the way and recognizing that deep, quiet work isn't always what we need to do on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes we need to be able to work eudaimonically as our best selves while around people or while delivering something else that perhaps we can have a little bit of noise around us when we do, like a coffee house noise. That hum can really go a long way and actually feeds into a variety of things for our brain that help to keep us connected and motivated and not completely disconnected. That can be off-putting, frankly, at times.
Right. But I love the reality of, and that was my question when I saw that physical creation of what it could look like, was this feels like, in theory, this makes sense, but humans are messy and complicated, and teams are messier and complicated, more complicated than that. And this, people don't follow a path like this every time they do something. And the other thing, I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with an architect, and from their perspective, they're like, well, Monday morning me is very different than Wednesday afternoon me, which is
Yes,
very
of
different
course.
than Friday afternoon me. And those three different people need three totally different types of environments, even for the same type of work that I change and what I need to engage with. So I think we're really talking about a dynamic environment where all these things are possible. I'm curious, have you come into or talked to anybody about? I've had a couple folks who have brought this up, the idea of abundance mindset, meaning not, and this is somewhat similar to the book that's out, but it's more about you within space having a variety of types of spaces for the same activities that are all a little bit different, so that whether it's the differences between you and me and kind of how our brains work, or whether it's the difference between you and yourself day over day, week over week, there are options for these things. So instead of what has traditionally been the mindset of workplace leaders is, hey, a 6-person conference room looks like this, it's shaped like this, it has these things, and every time we build one, we build it like this because I know it works. And they don't want variation on a theme because then, well, everyone's different. And I think, and I just had a conversation 2 days ago with somebody who I've been friends with for a long time, has a sensor company that was always focused on air quality. Well, he has realized that it's beyond air quality. So he was looking at this saying, buildings are often imperfect machines with rooms that are too hot and too cold, no matter how hard you try, and people are complaining. And in the same room, one person says too hot, the other person says too cold. There's so much variation what people want and need. So why not celebrate that? And why not have this wide variety of where you go to book a meeting or a space? It's like, in the morning, this is a warm room, and it shows up as warmer than usual, or it's brighter than usual. And you think, okay, I now have enough self-awareness to know that for that task, I need a bright, warm space to do that task. And for this other task, I need a dark, cool space to do it. And then I can kind of start to align those things. So I think there's something to me really exciting about having a much wider array of space types and space conditions. I mean, I think the traditional concept has been companies like Cisco came along saying, well, make it so that you just have your preferences, and when you show up, the room is automatically set to your color temperature, your heat temperature, and the light level. But if that changes, you could, I guess, have a variation depending on time of day or day of week. Point being, it's a self-awareness. What I would love to get into is the self-awareness that it takes to know that that's time, that place, that combination of things is what I need to do this thing. And then how do you share that with the team or with the group? And how do you make that part of the group's conversation about how we can each achieve those moments, and when, and how? That's the complexity of this that my head starts to really explode with. Just there's so many variables. It seems like this is the thing that we should all be trying to solve, but it's a very, very tough problem.
Oh my gosh, I love so much of that, and I'm trying to figure out what to latch onto and respond to first. Abundance mindset, I'm familiar with the concept. I haven't really heard it used much in the frame of workplace, but I think it certainly would align well with a lot of the well-being science theory, of course. That idea of activation and different things just offering choice. It definitely can speak to that and accommodate that, I would think. With respect to self-awareness, I think that that's a really fascinating avenue that you just went in that conversation, because a lot of what you were talking about is very much what I focused on when I finished my master's. So I joke I go to school every 10 years. I've already warned my husband I'll probably go into medicine, for my 50s, 60s. We'll just prepare him now. But after I had done a decade with Accenture and Booz Allen, I came to the Australian tax office of all places and was really inspired by the building I was here to see and work in. And it was lots of natural daylight. There was composting. We had spaces where I could actually choose where I wanted to work. That flexibility was inherent in the culture. And I was there, ironically, to do a recruitment and retention plan. And had I known then what I know now, I could have pointed to the building and said, this is your recruitment and retention plan, like done and
Mhm.
dusted. But it did inspire me to go more into that environmental psychology and eventual sustainable design side of things. And when I was doing my master's of science at an architecture school in London, everybody was talking about how to curate buildings so they required less energy. But I really liked a visiting professor from Cambridge who talked about people. And he talked about adaptive comfort theory. And I don't know if you've heard that term before. It's still kind of embedded in the 70s and has remained stuck there to some degree. But what I would argue is that good human interaction and HCI, HBI design that I alluded to before with computers and buildings, if it's done well, it inherently is doing adaptive. And if you're doing adaptive well, it's going to inherently achieve comfort. So you want people to interact with their buildings. You want them to be able to open windows. You want them to be able to respond when their body is reacting in a different type of way, or perhaps they just feel like cognitively they need something different. So encouraging that interaction, but also preparing somebody to do that and make better choices. And that's what I focused on with my master's thesis and then some of the work thereafter was how we can actually get into sustainable design, not just from the designer's perspective, having the onus on the design community to do better, to build better, et cetera. But how can we actually activate the knowledge of occupants? And how can we also provide some of those nudges that are intentional and not too controlling? And that's where we could get into feedback loops and technology. But I think what's key to achieve self awareness, people need data. They need to have an education. They need to understand a baseline and then the ramifications of their actions and what they can influence by choosing certain actions. So to understand the results of if they choose course A versus course C. And perhaps that's not a huge difference for them to choose C over A, but as an actual result for environment or perhaps organization, it's really impactful. So it's a lot about education. It's a lot about supporting those choices with information, data analysis in real ways that things can get to that next level. And that's why for a time I was doing what we were calling building intelligence and professional transformation, because I was really at the heart of that work in the 2010s when people weren't really talking about it. We were literally just making up titles for me to talk about how I was bringing together these unusual disciplines. But that's where I think the resonance is. Because, like you're saying, we need to have the activation of the people so that they can understand and then act on it and realize that they're messy humans. But then we also need the different things to support them so that when they choose to act, they know how to do it. They have the technology there to do it. And the technology, again, might be spatial and it might be digital. It just depends.
So the first thing I think of is the fact that when you ask somebody, what do you need to accomplish this thing? And they reflect and they give you an answer. I think most of the time, at least the reason architects a lot of times fail at programming is because they ask people what they want. And they're, well, what do you need to succeed? And then they tell them, well, I need to have this. And this is the only way I can do this. And then if they observe what they do, they often find that what they're saying and what they're doing are two totally different things because they don't have the self-awareness. So I think in built into what you're saying, how do we get organizations and people who operate and manage workplaces to push beyond their boundaries to get to have conversations with the HR team, with the communications team, and say, we need to help people be self-aware to understand when they achieve these things so that then they're not speaking from what they think. They now know this, they have observed it, and they've got, okay, I was thinking when you were talking about flow before, I realized, I don't know if I should admit this out loud, I can get into a state of flow when I'm driving long distances, when I'm driving, not if I'm sitting in the car, but if I'm driving. And if sometimes I'll go like an hour and I'll not even remember anything
That's not
about
uncommon.
the
You're not
drive.
alone. No.
But that's like scary because I go, oh, well, good thing nothing happened. I'm at some level, I'm paying attention, I guess, to what's going on because I'm still alive to be here. But it is, I know I can take myself through a series of things within a minute. I can be in that state if I'm alone, if I have that I maybe it's that constant sound of the road and the kind of monotony. And this is not when it's like bad weather or heavy traffic. This is just driving. you know I But for people to find their unique times and moments that really work for them, again, I think for a lot of people, they don't even know it happened if they did do it, and they wouldn't be able to tell you what it was. And if you ask them the question, they're going to tell you something almost every time. I want a private room where I can do it because that's where I have less distractions. And back to this idea of it's not always about flow state. A lot of times you actually are stuck on an idea. You need to be interrupted. You need somebody to challenge your thinking. And in that challenge is where you come up with the new thing you never would have come up with on your own because you were so stuck in the same loop and you kept repeating it. That's, to me, that's the exciting part about that messiness of people and being together. How do we organize this enough and create enough framework that people do get that value in those moments and they're not so focused on, well, I can't get my work done. And it just comes back to this generic and general statement, I can't get my work done in that environment. And we can totally dive, and a separate thing is to dive into the word work and what is actually work and the parts in between and all that. But I think that's what's so tough about this is we're trying to create in this conversation, what we're talking about, what you do, what we're trying to do, it's very much aligned in that we're trying to create better experiences for humans in the things that they do. And right now, the biggest problem is the humans themselves and the things that they're accustomed to and how they've always done things. So how do we create these events and these experiences we invite people to with the sole purpose of getting them to experience something that they never would have experienced in a typical work environment because it's just never presented to them. It's not an option. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, you've done it. How do we now turn that into something you can replicate and do in your real lives? Because I think it's what's exciting to me or what the biggest challenge is. And like you said before, sometimes the hardest things are the most rewarding. This is one of the biggest challenges we face is proving and showing people that we could actually create this in the wild, so to speak. Like these moments can happen with regularity and we can show teams how to make this part of what they do, part of their DNA.
Yeah. And I think so much of what you're saying touches upon aspects of eudaemonic design I didn't really talk about before. I didn't want to get too much into the nuance of the research and all the pain that that can entail, revisiting some aspects of the doctorate. But when I was exploring it, it was coming from a place where I used to work with the Cisco's, et cetera. A lot of my clients were Silicon Valley, Toronto, et cetera. And we were always designing for a desired future. What is this idyllic future in the 1, 2, 5, 10 years? What might that look like? What does that involve from an experiential perspective? And a lot at the time involved things like you were talking about having comfort and being able to curate conditions in a bubble in a desk. So not just zoning by room, but zoning by desk and using sensors to do all of that. And I think that's really interesting if you were to layer that data and be able to measure how people have an ebb and flow throughout the day from a temperature perspective, humidity, light exposure, all these different things. But I think if we were to layer that data on with people's preferences. And we could actually get some really good feedback loops again throughout the day to see when someone was satisfied doing what kind of task, and then interrogate that with AI. That's where AI can really make a huge difference because then we start identifying trends much more easily than we can just do by humans doing something like that. We can feed in a ton of data that is easily captured nowadays and start gleaning some lessons learned from that. And I think that's really key. And it's not just going to resonate with the average worker, just as,
Mhm.
workplaces were designed for the 30-year-old white man wearing a suit. A lot of times people are cold because it was in a condition working that was not designed for. And as we start understanding more about human needs and human preferences, we start understanding it's not just about maybe gender norms and dressing, clothing difference that comes into especially thermal comfort. It's about all these other aspects of design. So making sure that we can know ourselves and recognize what that means for a space that supports that self. So over the past few years, I've realized I'm very sensory sensitive. I've always kind of thought I was, but living in Australia now, it's remarkable because now I get migraines from too much sun. So if I have glare,
Mm.
too much intensive sun, it's just too much for me. And the same goes with sound. I'm very auditorially sensitive. I don't think it's quite misophonia, but it's certainly close to it. And For me, I know when I go to a restaurant, I need to be away from the wait staff zone where they're working through utensils. And I don't want to be near the glaringly bright light, but I also don't want to be in the too dark back. So, knowing yourself enough and then just start being able to be curious enough to pick out themes and then perhaps figure out how that could feed into a day to day work environment. Because for years, a lot of us really didn't have much say in work environments. We would have to be in an office. We couldn't even do it at home. Now, when we're doing either, we don't know how best to curate for them. And it's great because there are different governing bodies and certification systems that are out there, like International Well Building Institutes, Well and Fitwell, that I think are contributing really legitimately to the conversation to help give us guidance on what we as humans could benefit from when we think about proper light, proper sound, proper air quality, all those different assets of design. But then how can we get into the nuance? And what I was saying is that I didn't quite get into some of the Aristotelian side of things that comes back with the eudaemonic theory that I think is key here. And with Aristotle, when you think about flourishing, what I really like about his understood perspective is that it supports you and the ebb and flow throughout your life as you change. And I thought that that was really a beautiful way of seeing it. It's not about being perfect all the time. And I think when people think flourishing, that's what they picture. And that's far from the truth, at least in my approach to it. It's about understanding and designing for somebody almost when they're at their worst and when they're at the best and going in between and figuring out how that layers onto your colleagues, similar visions, best and worst. And then working through all that nuance to then understand how we can perhaps break through and create zones for a variety of people who might be a little bit more sensory sensitive, for example, or whatever else that might look like, and really just working with it. So, valuing the destination, that good end product design, as well as the journey itself. And that's another thing that Aristotle talked about, and that eudaemonic design ended up being about when I finished the dissertation. It was about how we can actually have principles to support people changing over time. So, for example, there's something where it's like connection versus privacy for one of my principles, and it's all on a continuum. And in that continuum, for example, you're going to change depending upon time of day, time of life. And I think that it's interesting to also interpret the fact that it's not just about the output, it's about the journey. And so I think we really need to build co design into a lot of our processes in real ways. For years, I would have to fight just to do workshops with people outside of a C suite. So, getting occupants, getting facility managers, like these people who are oftentimes considered by Joe Allen and people like that of Harvard as being more responsible for our health than our general practitioners. I think we need to bring them into the conversation and involve more people in the company to be able to contribute. So, employees, managers, C suite, facility managers, everybody who is managing facets of that building, bring them to the fore, co create what this looks like. And by doing so, then there's ownership. And then I think people are going to want to be able to contribute. And if you build that idea and the fabric into the connective tissue of mission, vision, values of a company, then that's going to be something that people will hopefully get behind. They'll start seeing how it could help them. They'll start seeing how perhaps that also plays into brand identity and their own identity. And it may even help strengthen connections. So I think, I mean, there's a lot of complexity that goes into it, but I think co design is a real key piece in achieving this and getting people activated and understanding that. And another thing I was just going to mention, I almost forgot. I don't know if you've come across Belbin. There is this really interesting work personality Belbin test that you can do. Have you ever heard of this?
Right now.
It's about knowing your preferred work style. So if you have a penchant for research or perhaps sales or whatever, it would help to identify your top two markers. And I used to do it with teams all the time, and it would get a conversation going about how we like to work, but also how we
Right.
like to work now versus in the past versus going forward. And people would start talking about home life and, oh, wouldn't it be great? I have a new baby at home. I would really like to be able to work. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I would like to work between 5 and 7 a.m. and then take a break and then get back online at 11. Is there any way that could work for everybody? And we were having these conversations in like 2011, and we did it within my team, and it worked out really well because I'm a bit of a night owl and I was able to manage the team work and then hand it off before that person was then getting up after I'd gone to sleep. And you start realizing different ways of working. And I think just having that open-mindedness really creates a lot of opportunity.
So I I love all of this, and I think where I'm imagining weaving together a bunch of the things that you just talked about. AI being used to observe and digest and process all of the nuances of the messiness of a team and the team dynamic and preferences, schedules, tasks, and that combined with spaces that are designed with the idea of, instead of trying to create uniformity, because and frankly, the facilities people you mentioned that I do agree have more to do with people's well-being than a lot of other people in their lives, and they don't even realize it. I have more times than I can count in my career had a conversation about, can we please move away from the uniformity? The humans are far more diverse than this, and it all comes back to how easy is it to maintain, how easy is it to move parts from one thing to the next. If this team gets taken away and this team gets added, how quickly can I make that swap? And every time I've tried, whether it's been inside of an organization or outside of an organization, to bring the variety that allows, one, gives a team the ability to design and identify with a space in a way that's uniquely different. That salesperson or the sales team next to the researcher will probably need completely different sorts of things for the work that they do. Yet we design to the lowest common denominator. We look for things that, oh, well, why do we have this carpet? Because it doesn't show stains. Why do we have that color? Because it's easy to paint over. Why do we have, and we're forgetting the fact we're designing for efficiency. We're not designing for the variety and messiness and diversity of human beings or the teams that they're a part of. If we could do bring these two things together and create what feels like a cornucopia of spaces and options. Now, whether they're all there or whether they're able to be varied, so the same space could be three different things just through technology. It could be dark, it could be light, it could be quiet, it could be loud. It could change color even, and it's responding to you and where you're at. And I have a tool that's giving me real time feedback. I've been getting to the point with my watch with health type things and sleeping and wherever. I'm really learning a lot about myself. And I was really slow to adopt all this. And people have been doing this for a long time. But I just, in the last couple of years, I've realized that self-awareness I can't achieve without the outside perspective telling me. And then once I see the pattern, then I recognize it and I can act on it. We don't have this in work other than a manager giving feedback on your work product or how you do it, and which is very much based in their perception of how you should be doing it because they're modeling it after themselves in most cases, unlike what you described, which is a very empathetic team and environment where we're trying to allow everybody to do what works best for them. And there are those teams that exist, but they are by far the minority. And meanwhile, we have all these other people put into environments that are designed for the lowest common denominator, with managers asking them to work the way they want them to work, and organizations telling them how they're going to do these things. We're basically stifling all the potential of what we're talking about when it's right there in front of us. That's, to me, is what this is all about, is how do we unlock this? How do we do that co-design you're talking about? And to me, the key is convincing leaders of companies that if they take this approach and change the way they see all this, they can fundamentally change the output of their organization, the quality of the work they do, the type of people they attract and retain, and the business outcomes. And instead of trying to squeeze more out of this thing they have and make it operate more and more efficiently, less expensively, it's about opening up to what's possible and finding out that you could do this same group of people could do so much more than you ever imagined if you allowed them to flourish, which is, I think, this is why to me, the one thing that AI, of all the things that I see all the potential of it, this idea of helping us be better versions of ourselves is the most exciting part of all.
I completely agree. And I think it's that capability of unlocking human potential. If AI could help us in doing that by building on the knowledge that we're curating with things like eudaemonic design and understanding all the messiness that that involves, I mean, that's really what could be key. And we're finally starting to have some resonance and understanding that it's not necessarily just about the old school approach to productivity, being automatons and machines at work. It's realizing too, it's about this outcome. Like, where are we actually having something that's going to still mean dollars, but from a perspective of people doing well and enjoying their jobs? And I know Nick Bloom does this really well by understanding the economics of making these kinds of arguments. And I think people like Joseph Allen, who I said before, Joe and John Maycomer with their book, Healthy Buildings, really helped set a lot of this conversation back in like 2020 when their book came out first. But I think it's shifting the conversation, having more arguments for ratios such as JLL's 330, 300, talking about how much we pay for people and how much that actually stacks up in our bottom line. And if we actually allocate time and effort to making sure people are happy, recruiting, and then importantly, retaining them, then that's when people are going to hopefully start taking notice. And I'm actually surprised it's still not quite the understanding that I thought the trajectory was going in 5 years ago. There's, of course, this return to office mandate and kind of the blind way of kind of going back to how things were always done. And I think it's just fighting that age old assumption and all the age old assumptions that go with it and really putting all those things on their heads because we don't need to do things the same way. So when you're talking to a facility manager, of course, it's going to be about convenience. How can we turn something over? How can we easily condition a space that's on a floor instead of doing all these little zones that were not created that way? So that's when a lot of times I reach back and say, well, I was originally trained as a mechanical engineer, so I understand this. Let's work through together how this could actually meet the requirements and needs of this client, whether it's their client or not, even if it's in house. And that's when I kind of go back to the service design background and working through, all right, let's line item all our requirements. Let's prioritize them. Let's then figure out how that could actually be realized in a variety of ways. Let's get creative. And this is going to be a soapbox moment for me a little bit because I really think transdisciplinarity, in addition to AI, are where the answers are. Because we constantly say to solve wicked problems, and let's face it, this is not considered like an environmental wicked problem. But if we achieve flourishing properly to support individual, societal, and planetary health, it certainly could help the health of everything. But I think what we need to do is really just make sure that we can focus on things and get them done in a way that's different. And doing so requires transdisciplinarity and different thinking. And it's oftentimes argued for, but not really realized. There are not roles that support transdisciplinary specialists. Education systems are starting to train for transdisciplinarity more. But then when people are graduating and coming into the real world, roles have to be created for them. A lot don't exist. It's still an architect is an architect, an engineer is an engineer. And we need people who are interrogating these messy middles to creatively think through the arts and science of the approach. And I've gotten very much into creative thinking and imagination, really, to understand that facet of design and help to advocate for people who think differently. So it's not just about creating a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing building, it's about also understanding the mechanics and how we can marry everything in the middle that actually changes people's experience, but makes life not so horrible for the facility manager and all the other people who are involved. So only can we understand the pain points if we get people involved and identify those things up front, and then we can design for them. So I think it's just balancing all those different things out and then figuring out how we individually as humans, transdisciplinary humans or whatever, however we approach it, but thinking about it in different approaches, can be combining those visions with AI to really optimize and enhance experience. And then we'll have workplaces that people want to come to. And if they don't come, then that's fine. Then maybe you can decondition the space for a day or two and not be completely worried about having to maintain it on an off day. There are different strategies that could be put in place to balance all these different factors out.
So, with all of that, the last thing I'll leave us with is that my hope is, from what I'm seeing from the data from a number of groups, is that the companies that are being created that have been created since the pandemic or being created by younger people are being created with a different mindset than the large companies that have been around for decades that have leaders who have been working the same way their entire career. And I think while the total numbers may still be skewed in favor of one-sided, we need to go back to the way things used to be thinking, I think that the number of companies, and for what I've seen, this can be proven that the number of companies that are focused on going forward to develop more meaningful experiences for people at work is far greater than the number of companies who are going backwards. So what I hope and my aspiration is that people like us can start to meet those people who lead those organizations, who see the opportunity to bring that. And I love the transdisciplinary approach concept. I'd never heard that word. That's how I'm built. I've got a lot of different experiences, and we surround ourselves with people with different experiences. And we are very much focused not on creating beauty for the sake of beauty, which most places of work that have ever been lauded or received positive accolades are because they're beautiful and not because they help people be better versions of themselves. And I think we can collectively take people on this journey to a place where, yes, the space is beautiful, but first, the space is helping you be a better version of yourself and helping you get more out of that time that you spend together. And you are choosing to spend time there because you see the positive outcomes of being there with other people. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and finding ways for us to help each other do that and help individuals and companies flourish and succeed. And thank you very much for being a part of this. And we will continue talking down the road.
That sounds wonderful. Thanks for a great chat today.